In this video, we will show you how to replace your front press-in wheel bearing on this Honda Civic. This will be located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing we have to do, safely raise and support the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. I like to have the suspension hanging. Once you've completed that, we're going to remove all 5 of these lug nuts using a 19mm so we can remove the wheel. With the wheel out of the way, let's continue on with a 32mm to remove our axle nut. Now we're going to break the axle free from the wheel bearing hub. A couple light taps with a hammer and punch for this. Once you have movement from there, we can continue on. Now we're going to push back the caliper piston. You really can't see it, but it's actually located inside this area here. We're going to use a small pry bar, make our way in between this caliper port here. We're attempting to press up against the rotor on the inside there, and just start carefully pushing that caliper just enough that we have some movement here. Now along the backside, we're going to remove our 2 caliper bracket mounting bolts. We'll be using a 17mm to remove each of these. For the first one, we'll fully remove it and then start it back in a couple threads. Get that next one all the way up top here. Make sure you're holding onto that caliper while you fully remove that first bolt that we started removing. As you slide the caliper out of place, just go ahead and give those brake pads a quick inspection. You should be able to see them right through that caliper bracket. If it looks like they're worn at an angle or damaged in any way, just go ahead and replace them. These look fine. We'll set this aside, putting no pressure on our flex hose. Now let's remove our brake rotor. For this brake rotor, you're going to find that it's held in place with 2 Phillips head mounting screws. For this, we're going to use a bit driver. It's going to be easiest if we go ahead and turn this counterclockwise. We're applying pressure and we'll tap it with a hammer. Should break it free. There we are. A quick inspection of the mounting hardware as we continue, of course. This next one. There's that one. We'll take hold of that brake rotor. You should be able to remove it from the area. Continuing on, you just want to go ahead and give this a close inspection. If it looks like it needs to be replaced, go ahead and replace this with your brake pads at the same time. We'll set it aside. Along the rear of the steering knuckle, we're going to dislodge the outer tie rod end. First, we're going to remove our locking cotter pin. We'll get that out of the way. For this, I'm just going to use some cutters. You can also use pliers if you want. I'm going to be using an 18mm for my outer tie rod end mounting nut. Just leave that on there a couple threads. Continuing on, we're going to separate that tie rod end from the knuckle. You can do that several different ways. Typically, if you just tap on this area with a hammer, the vibration will break it free. Otherwise, you can use a tie rod removal tool. A quick inspection of the tie rod to confirm there's no damage. Move along to your ABS wheel speed sensor right up here in the knuckle. This is held in place with a 10mm headed mounting bolt. Careful not to break this off. Okay. There's that. Now, as far as the wheel speed sensor, you're going to want to try to give it a little twist to break it free and then lift it up and out. It's common for it to be stuck in there. If it is, you can try using some penetrant and just give it a little wiggle with some pliers. Just be careful not to break it. Let's set this aside. Now let's move along to removing our upper mounting hardware holding our steering knuckle to the front strut. You're going to find that you have 2 17mm headed mounting bolts that make their way through the rear of this area out towards the front. On the forward side, you're going to have a 19mm mounting nut for each one of these bolts. Let's remove the pair, but we're going to leave one in there loosely. Just make sure we have some movement. Let's just be careful for our ABS wire. This looks good. Let's leave this in here. Now we're going to make our way all the way down to the bottom of this steering knuckle. We'll be paying attention to where our lower ball joint connects to the lower control arm. Now under this area, you can see the mounting hardware. We have two 17mm mounting nuts and one 17mm mounting bolt. Let's start by removing the mounting bolt, and then we'll continue on to the two mounting nuts. Let's get this last one. Let's pause down there. We're making our way back up top. We can wiggle that steering knuckle around to remove our final upper mounting bolt there that we left in place. Now we'll pull the upper portion away from the front strut, and then we should be able to lift this up, removing the ball joint from that lower control arm. We're gonna have to push the axle through. Now let's get this over to the press. We have to remove the wheel bearing hub from the wheel bearing itself. For this, we want to make sure we have some adapters set up so we can have this as level as possible. Just bring this into position. The areas that I'm going to be using to hold this up would be the areas where the caliper would be sitting. And then also over on the far side, away from that, we have the area for the tie rod end. Let's just make sure everything's seated as properly as possible and we're aligned with the driver on the press itself. Once we have it set up, we're going to start pressing the hub out from the back side. We're going to press on the center circle here. That's the one for the hub. For that, you can use a 30mm socket. It fits right in place. There we are. Let's make one more alignment here. We want to press as evenly as possible at all times. Now, as I start bringing this down and applying pressure, obviously we want to make sure that we're not causing any damage to the knuckle in any one of the places that we're holding. And of course, underneath this area where the hub's going to come down, you need to have a nice gap under here. Once it does come down, just be careful that it doesn't fall down and potentially hurt you. Slow and steady wins the race. There we are, broke free. Let's continue on. Now as we continue on, we're paying attention down in this area. We want to make sure that the hub can make its way down. Once again, just make sure nothing's in this area that can get hurt or damaged. Nice and slow. There we are. Now that's pretty common when it does break free. We're going to continue on over at the bench. We have to remove our snap ring. In this area, you're going to find that you have a snap ring, so we just want to have some snap ring pliers. You can see looking at this, it has two little tabs there. We want to try to get the tip of those snap ring pliers inside of those ports so we can squeeze this together and pull it out of place. You might have to use a small screwdriver or even a pick once we do get this so it starts moving. There we are. Now, of course, this is under spring tension. We want to make sure it does not come flying away and potentially hurt us in any way. There's our snap ring. Typically, you do reuse these, so just go ahead and clean it up, give it a thorough inspection, make sure it's not rotted and weak. We'll set this aside. At this point, we can get this back over to the press. Now we've got this set back up on our press, so we can continue on pressing that bearing out. To press the bearing out, you want to try to get as far along this outboard edge as possible. By pressing in the center area, you're only going to push out the race. We need to push out the entire bearing casing. If you have a small adapter or even an old pre-existing bearing casing, you can use that as long as it fits along that area. Now I'm just going to insert some spacers here. Get this as close as possible. Make sure everything's properly aligned. We'll take our time here. All right, let's start applying some pressure here. Here we are, starting to break free here. Just switch out the adapters as necessary. Now that the bearing's making its way down and out of here, it's going to come out a lot easier, so I'm going to continue on with a different adapter. I'm just using a 36mm socket in this area. Of course, we will be pressing on the race now, but everything should be free enough that we can press this out. Okay, get some pressure on there. It's almost out of there. There we are. The next thing we'll do is clean out the mounting port on our steering knuckle to confirm everything's still in good usable order. Just going to use some parts cleaner or wire brush. We'll give it a quick wipe. Let's have a look from the other side here real quick. Now from this side, as you remember, we had to remove a snap ring. We want to confirm that we can make our way inside the groove all the way around. It's common to have some miscellaneous debris or rust. Clean that up as well. Be careful for any metal burrs here. We don't want to get a cut. Everything's smooth. Looks like it's definitely still reusable. One thing that I do see on this is our backing plate is actually in very poor condition here. It's very flexible. It's pretty much ready to separate. It's a good idea to replace it if yours is in this condition. Now we're going to remove the bearing race from our wheel bearing hub here. To do this, you can do it several different ways. I have mine in a vise, and I'm going to be using an air chisel, try to make my way inside this area and gently start driving this out and away. Here we go. Okay, we can see it starting to separate. As we continue on, we want to be extremely careful this does not come flying off and potentially hurt somebody. Now that we have that off of there, we need to clean and inspect that hub to confirm it's still reusable. Just going to use some parts cleaner or rag. You can also use some sandpaper if necessary. Careful for any burrs, you don't want to get a cut. Make sure that's a smooth surface. Has to press into the brand new bearing. It's perfect. Okay, it's time to install our brand new wheel bearing. When installing this, we want to pay attention to the orientation. You'll find on one side of the bearing you have a magnetic strip making its way all the way around, and on the opposite side you do not. We want to have the magnetic strip facing inboard towards where that ABS sensor would be, not out towards where the brakes would be. So since this is in the press, sitting like it is, I have that magnetic strip facing down. As you start placing this in, you'll find it only goes in so far, and continuing on, we're going to have to gently press this in. When pressing it in, we can only press along this outer ring. You never press along the center or even along this area here. Only along the outer ring. I'll be using a flat adapter here. We'll get this down as low as possible. Continuing on from there, we'll have to use the original bearing casing and press it down a little further so we can continue on with our locking ring. Now, as we start bringing this down, we're paying attention to confirm this is not binding in any way. If it feels like it's under pressure, you might be off kilter, in which case you can cause damage. Okay, now as I said, I can only go so far. Let's go ahead and release pressure here. We'll give it a quick inspection and continue on pressing it in. I have my original bearing casing. As you can tell, it fits directly along that outer portion of the bearing only, not along the center area. Once again, this is extremely important. You do not cause any damage to your brand new bearing. Small spacer here. Double check, make sure we're properly aligned, and we'll continue on bringing this down. Alright, so right there as I was bringing this down, it went down fairly easily, and then it stopped. That's a good pause point. Let's continue on by releasing pressure. We're going to turn this over so we can have a look along the backside. Now what we're looking for here is a couple things. We can see our magnetic strip. It looks like it's in perfect condition, which is great news. Other than that, we want to make sure that our bearing is bottomed out against that lip in here. There's no gap, making its way all the way around. This looks good, so let's continue on with our locking ring at the bench. Now I've got my locking ring on my snap ring pliers here. We're just going to squeeze. We'll start bringing it into position on that groove. Carefully release pressure here. Now we just need to confirm that this is properly in place all the way around. Back to the press. We're at the press, we have our hub. I've already cleaned it up. I like to apply a thin amount of copper anti-seize along this area. That's going to help this slide into place. Continuing on, we're going to take our brand new bearing and we'll slide it right over that bearing hub. It should want to rest on there. The next thing we need to do is continue pressing this all the way down onto that bearing hub. When we press, we only want to press on the center area of the bearing here. To be able to do that, use the race that you had removed from the hub. It should fit right onto this area. Now we can use an adapter here all the way up to our pressing point and we'll continue driving this down. It's extremely important to make sure you're properly aligned throughout this process. Now as we continue pressing this down, we want to make sure we're not binding in any way, so I'm going to take hold of the knuckle and we'll continue twisting as we press this down. Okay, right there I feel as though I have a little bit of pressure here. Let's have a quick peek in this area, confirming that we're properly seated. We should not see any gap in between the hub and this knuckle. Double check, make sure we're not bound up in any way. This needs to be able to pivot freely. Now we can release pressure and we can get back over to the vehicle. Prior to installation, let's clean up several areas, starting with the lower strut. Use a wire brush. Just double check, make sure it's not rotted and weak. Moving along to our axle. I want to make sure the splines are nice and clean along here. Remove any rust or debris from along this area. Clean the mounting surface on your lower control arm. A little bit of copper anti-seize on the splines of the axle here. We don't necessarily need to go on the threaded area where that axle nut will sit. Now we can get our bearing and hub assembly on the vehicle. Let's lift up on the axle a little bit so we can start sliding through the back side of the bearing. Continuing on, we have our lower ball joint studs. Slide those right into that lower control arm. We're going to hold upward pressure here. Continue on with your lower ball joint mounting bolts first. Just go ahead and start that in a couple threads if you can. We have our two lower ball joint mounting nuts down along the bottom. Now let's continue rolling this up into the upper position along the bottom of that front strut. We have our two mounting bolts for this. Go ahead and start them through there. We're coming from the rear towards the front. Now after sliding those through, we can start on each one of our two mounting nuts. After they're both started on, you can snug them up. The torque for these is 125 foot-pounds. Let's hold the bolt side with our 17mm wrench and we can snug up those 19mm nuts. When we do so, just be extremely careful not to cause any damage to your ABS wheel speed sensor. Now we're making our way all the way down to the lower ball joint mounting hardware that holds it to that lower control arm. Let's start by tightening our mounting bolts and then the two nuts. The torque for each of these is 43 foot-pounds. Next, we need to clean up the mating surface of our hub here and also the back side of our brake rotor so we can continue on to installing that brake. Let's use a wire brush. You can also use some sandpaper or even a sanding disc to clean this up. After you have that cleaned up, we're just going to use some parts cleaner. Now it's time for some anti-seize. We'll coat this entire surface, especially in the ports where the mounting bolts will go. And get our brake rotor in place. I've already cleaned the backside on that mating surface. As we bring this in, we're paying attention to our mounting bolt ports in comparison to where our lug studs are. Press that on there as far as possible. Continue on with your 2 mounting bolts inside of each one of these ports. Let's install our mounting screws using my bit driver here. It's time to install our ABS wheel speed sensor on the back side of the knuckle here. Let's try to get this in place. We want to slide it down in here. If it feels like it's binding in any way, you might need to clean something up. Let's get our 10mm bolt started in by hand. We can snug it up. The torque for this is 7 foot-pounds. Let's get this torque to that 7 foot-pounds. There we go. Just double check, make sure that's properly secured in place. Let's get this caliper in place. We'll continue on with our 2 mounting bolts for this. I'm using some blue thread locker. Start them in, snug them up. The torque for these is 80 foot-pounds. There's that one. Now we can torque these. Now it's time for the outer tie rod end. We'll make sure that we have it aligned with our steering knuckle port here. Slide it straight up and through. Start on your mounting nut. Snug it up, torque it to 40 foot-pounds. After torquing that, let's continue on to our locking cotter pin. This will essentially just prevent this from loosening up and falling off while you're driving down the road. Now it's time to install our axle nut. Let's start this on here. We're going to carefully bottom it out by hand using a hand tool. Never use an impact tool installing your mounting nut. You can cause damage to your bearing. To be able to torque this, we're going to get it a little bit closer to the ground. We'll be holding it still using either a pry bar, or we can have a second person holding the brake pedal, and we'll torque this down. We'll install our pry bar in this area across our lug studs, confirming we are not going to cause any damage. We can continue tightening this to 133 foot-pounds. Once you have it torqued, the next thing we have to do is lock this down. If you're looking at the axle shaft itself, you can see that it has a small notch in it. This can be facing in pretty much any direction, and you can spin it as necessary. We want to make sure we peen this down into that notch, making sure that the nut cannot loosen up while we're driving down the road. There we are. One last quick inspection in this area, and we can reinstall our wheel. Once you have your wheel in place, start on all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts. We'll bottom them out. Get the wheel safely on the ground and torque each of these to 80 foot-pounds. Now we've got the wheel back on the ground, we're going to torque these to that 80 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Okay friend, we finished our installation. The next thing you need to do is go ahead and pump up your brake pedal till it's nice and firm. Take your vehicle for a road test, get yourself a 4-wheel alignment. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.